The air in the Xylan transport was cold, recycled, and smelled of ionized air and sanctimony. Elara kept her gaze fixed on the viewing port, watching the swirling vermilion and ochre of the planet's surface below. It was a world the Galactic Concord had designated P-77, but the Xylans had named it Silessa, a word for new beginning in their flowing tongue. For Elara it was to be her end. She could feel the subtle, judgmental glances of the others. Her people were slender, elegant beings, their skin a luminous silver gray, their large, liquid black eyes capable of conveying a universe of unspoken consensus. They moved with a fluid, collective grace, a symphony of perfect efficiency. Elara's movements, once just as fluid, were now a broken rhythm. A support strut from a collapsing cargo loader had shattered her leg 6 cycles ago. The bone knitters had done their best, but the damage was too severe. A permanent, slight limp was the best outcome. A flaw. An imperfection. The ship began its descent, the gentle hum shifting to a low roar. Elder Valen, his form tall and unblemished, stood at the center of the cabin. His voice was a calm, melodic instrument devoid of malice, which made his words cut all the deeper. The initial survey is complete. The Silesian plains offer the most viable location for our new enclave. The soil is rich, the atmosphere within our tolerances. It will require our full, unimpeded commitment. His eyes, by chance or design, swept over Elara. She felt her heart constrict. She had known this was coming. The whispers had started the moment the medics gave their final prognosis. A burden cannot be carried forever. It must be set down for the good of the whole. The landing was seamless. The hatch hissed open, revealing a landscape of startling, violent color. Giant, rust-colored ferns swayed in a wind that smelled of spice and decay. Elara, Valen's voice was soft. Walk with me. Her stomach turned to ice. She forced herself to stand, the ache in her leg a constant, throbbing reminder of her inadequacy. She followed him away from the ship, away from the silent, watching eyes of the tribe. They walked for 100 meters, the cacophony of alien insects and the rustle of unseen life filling the air. He stopped and turned to her. In his hand was a small, standard-issue survival pouch. He held it out to her, not meeting her eyes. The great cycle is the foundation of all things, he recited, the words a sacred mantra. Growth, decay and renewal. All must play their part. Our resources are finite, our margin for survival is slim. To carry a weight that cannot keep pace, it endangers the entire cycle. Tears welled in Elara's eyes, hot and shameful. I can still contribute. My knowledge of... Your knowledge is recorded in the databanks, Valen said, his tone final. Your physical form can no longer keep pace with the demands of this world. Your part in the cycle is now to nourish this soil. It is the most profound use you can now provide. To return to the whole. He pressed the survival pouch into her numb hands. It was lighter than it should have been. She fumbled it open. A water filter. A single high-density nutrient bar. A thermal blanket. No communicator. No distress beacon. You are leaving me here to die. The words were a choked whisper. We are honoring the natural order, Valen corrected, his gaze finally lifting to the tumultuous sky. The cycle does not sentiment. It simply is. Without another word, he turned and walked back to the ship. He did not look back. None of them did. The hatch sealed with a sound of finality that was louder than any explosion. The engines whined, lifting the vessel in a cloud of crimson dust. In moments, it was a speck, then gone, swallowed by the vast, indifferent sky. Silence descended, broken only by the alien sounds of the wildlands. The full weight of her abandonment crashed down upon her. She was alone. On a Class 9 biohazard world. With a crippled leg and one day's rations. Panic seized her. She had to move to find shelter. The reports had spoken of crepuscular predators, of flora that reacted to movement. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every rustle was a stalker. She stumbled forward, her limp a pronounced, agonizing drag. The heavy gravity was a torture, each step sending jolts of pain up her spine. A shrieking cry echoed from a copse of twisted, purple-barked trees. Something large moved within it. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw a flash of iridescent chitin, multiple limbs, and a pair of serrated mandibles. She broke into a clumsy, staggering run. It was no use. Her leg buckled, sending her tumbling down a steep, moss-covered embankment. She landed with a cry of pain, her bad leg twisting beneath her. A fresh, white-hot agony lanced through her. She curled into a ball, clutching her leg, sobbing in fear and pain. She dragged herself under the broad leathery leaf of a giant plant, its underside glowing with a faint phosphorescent blue. It offered meager cover, but it was all she had. As darkness fell, the cold seeped into her bones. The thermal blanket was a pathetic shield against the planet's chill. She pulled the nutrient bar from the pouch and stared at it. 1 bar. A day's sustenance. What was the point? Valen was right. This was the natural order. The flawed are culled. The strong survive. The perfect, efficient system of the universe. She was a failed component being removed from the machine. She closed her eyes, waiting for the end to come. It came not with teeth or claws but with a sound. A rhythmic, ground-shaking thump, thump, thump. It was heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. It wasn't the skittering gait of a native predator. This was something else. Something that moved with an impossible, terrifying weight. She peered out from under her leaf. Through the misting rain and gloom, a colossal figure emerged. It was a biped encased in scarred, matte gray environmental armor. It was easily twice her height, its shoulders impossibly broad, its form speaking of raw, brute power. A human. Galactic lore flooded her mind. Deathworlders. Savages from a planet of nightmares. Beings of unimaginable violence and aggression. Their strength was legendary, their ferocity the stuff of cautionary tales. This was it. This was how she would die. Not by the clean efficiency of the local fauna, but torn apart by a monster. The human stopped. Its faceless helmet turned slowly, scanning the area. The glowing sensors on its visor swept over her hiding place, paused and locked on. It had seen her. Ilera held her breath, praying to God she no longer believed in for a swift death. The giant took a step toward her. Then another. The ground trembled with its approach. It loomed over her, a mountain of metal and menace, blocking out the faint light of the alien moons. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the crushing grip. A sound of servos whirring. A hiss of equalizing pressure. She forced her eyes open. The human had knelt. Its massive armored form was now crouched before her, bringing its terrifying helmeted head level with hers. It made no sudden moves. It emitted no growls. One of its huge, gauntlet hands came up, and with a surprising, deliberate slowness, it reached for her. This was it. It was going to grab her, crush her. The hand stopped, hovering in the air between them. The fingers, thick enough to snap her spine, were not curled into a fist but held open. The gesture was not one of attack. It was an offer. Terror was a cold, solid weight in her chest, heavier than the planet's gravity. Every lesson, every galactic briefing screamed at her to scramble away, to scream, to do anything but accept the touch of a deathworlder. But her body was broken, her spirit shattered. There was no fight left. As the human's gauntlet hand gently closed around her arm, the touch was not crushing, but astonishingly careful, its grip calibrated to lift without causing further pain. She was pulled from her miserable shelter with an ease that was as terrifying as it was effortless. The shape and size suggested he, cradled her against the cold, hard plating of his chest, one arm supporting her back, the other under her legs. Her crippled limb throbbed, but the position was, against all logic, the least painful it had been since her fall. He began to walk. His stride was long, ground-eating, and impossibly steady. Each footfall was a soft, deep thud that transmitted through his armor into her bones. The chaotic, fearful sounds of the vermilion wildlands seemed to recede, the predators unwilling to approach the rhythmic, powerful tremor of his passage. She dared to open her eyes, seeing the alien forest blur past at a speed her own people could never manage, even unencumbered. He moved with a purpose that was absolute, a force of nature navigating another force of nature. This was not a predator carrying its prey, this was a transaction. A relocation. The thought was somehow more frightening. They arrived at a structure built into the base of a colossal, spiraling rock formation. It was not a Xylan enclosure of flowing curves and soft light. This was a fortress of function. Walls of welded metal and local stone formed a defiant, angular block against the organic chaos outside. A heavy, reinforced door slid aside with a low grind, revealing not a den of bones and filth, but a chamber of stark, organized utility. The air that washed over her was a shock. It was clean, filtered, and carried a complex tapestry of unfamiliar scents. The sharp tang of ozone, the rich smell of wet soil from a row of plant trays under a growth lamp, and a warm, roasted, almost bitter aroma that she would later learn was coffee. The light was a steady, golden glow from panels in the ceiling, illuminating a space devoid of ornamentation but rich in purpose. Tools were racked with precision on magnetic strips. Data slates were stacked neatly on a desk, their screens showing scrolling lines of terraforming metrics and geological surveys. There were no trophies, no signs of slaughter. Only a silent, potent testament to control. He moved to a low, padded platform, a cot, and set her down with that same unnerving gentleness. She flinched as he reached for the bindings on her leg, a whimper escaping her lips. He froze instantly, his large hands pausing in midair. He then did something inexplicable. He took a deliberate step back, creating space, and slowly, deliberately removed his helmet. The face that was revealed was not the snarling visage of a monster. It was weathered. A landscape of hard lines and angles, etched by time and elements. His hair was cropped short, a dark brown peppered with gray at the temples. His skin was tanned and rugged. But his eyes, they were a calm, deep gray, like a still sea after a storm. They held no malice, no predatory gleam. They held only a quiet, focused assessment. He looked at her, then at her leg, then back at her face, his expression unreadable but intent. He moved again, this time more slowly, his movements telegraphed. He retrieved a metal case marked with a red cross. A medkit. Kneeling before her, he produced a small device that hummed and projected a pale blue light over her injured leg. A scanner. He studied the readout on his wrist comm, his brow furrowed in concentration. He then set to work. His hands, despite their size and the visible calluses, were remarkably deft. He cleaned the dirt and dried blue blood from her torn skin with a sterile wipe, the antiseptic smell sharp and clean. He applied a cooling salve from a tube, the gel instantly numbing the fiery pain. Finally, he took a roll of a strange, white polymer-based tape. He wrapped it around her leg in the simple splint he'd fashioned, and when he shone a penlight on it, the material hardened in seconds into a rigid, lightweight cast. It was more advanced, more effective than anything her own people had used. He stood, walked to a food synthesizer, and returned with a self-heating nutrient pack and a bulb of water. He placed them on the cot beside her and retreated to his workbench, turning his back to her, giving her the illusion of privacy. The message was clear. I am not a threat to you right now. You are safe here. Her Xylan sensibilities were in turmoil. This was not how it was supposed to be. Predators did not heal. They did not offer sanctuary. They consumed. This contradiction was more destabilizing than any direct attack. She drank the water, the cool liquid a blessing to her parched throat, and ate the nutrient paste, its blandness a comfort. The simple acts of drinking and eating, performed in safety, felt like a profound rebellion against Valen's great cycle. As she finished, he approached again. He stopped a respectful distance away and placed a hand flat on his own chest. "Kalen," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble, deeper than any Xylan's. It was not a growl. It was a name. He then looked at her, a silent question in those calm gray eyes. Understanding dawned. Swallowing her fear, she whispered, her voice hoarse, "Elara." A single slow nod. "Elara." He repeated her name, the syllables sounding strange and solid in his deep tone. And then, the most impossible thing of all happened. The stern line of his mouth softened, not into a smile, but into something quieter, an acknowledgement. A pact. That night, curled on the cot under a surprisingly soft thermal sheet, listening to the steady rhythmic hum of the habitat's life support and the distant, muffled howls of the world outside, the terror finally began to recede, replaced by a bewildering, fragile sense of security. The monster was not in the habitat with her. The monster was outside, and the giant, silent human between her and it was, for reasons she could not fathom, her protector. The universe, she realized, was far more complex and far less logical than her tribe had ever taught her. The days settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. Elara's world, once defined by the collective murmur of her tribe, was now measured by the sounds of Kalen's solitary work. The hum of the water reclaimer, the hiss of a welding torch, the soft chime of incoming data on his slate. Her fear of him, while not gone, had been compartmentalized, filed away under a new and bewildering category, anomaly. He was a paradox she could not solve. She watched him. It became her primary occupation. She saw how he moved through the habitat with an economy of motion that spoke of a deep, ingrained efficiency, so different from the Xylan's graceful, almost performative flow. His strength was not for show. She saw him single-handedly lift a broken power converter that would have required 3 of her people. His muscles cording with the effort, his breath a soft, controlled hiss. He did not strain for applause, he simply did what was necessary. One morning, a piercing alarm blared from the environmental control panel. Kalen was there in an instant, his large fingers dancing across the interface with a surprising delicacy. The readout showed a cascading failure in the primary air filtration system. A biofilm, a stubborn rubbery lichen from the local atmosphere, was choking the intakes. He gathered his tools and stepped outside. From the viewport, Elara watched him work. He had the housing open, his focus absolute. That was when the screecher arrived. It was a nightmare of chitin and claws, a low-slung predator that moved in a blur of iridescent blue, its namesake cry shredding the air. It had likely been drawn by the vibrations of his work. Elara's heart seized. This was it. This was the Deathworlder fury she had been waiting for. She expected him to grab a weapon, to roar, to meet the violence with overwhelming force. Kalen did not turn. He did not flinch. As the creature launched itself at his back, he simply straightened to his full, imposing height and pivoted on his heel. He did not strike. He stood, a mountain of plasteel and will, and from a device on his belt, he emitted a low, resonant, pulsing frequency. It was a sound that vibrated deep in Elara's bones, a feeling of immense, unpleasant pressure. The screecher skidded to a halt, its multiple eyes blinking in confusion. It let out another cry, but this one was laced with frustration and something else. Uncertainty. Kalen took one slow, deliberate step forward, the pulse from his device intensifying. The predator shuffled back, then turned and fled into the ferns, its territorial display utterly broken not by a fight, but by a presence it could not comprehend. Kalen watched it go for a moment, then turned back to the filter housing and resumed his work as if he had merely shooed away a minor pest. The lesson was searingly clear. His greatest weapon was not his strength, but his absolute, unshakable dominance. A profound sense of uselessness settled over Elara later that day. She was consuming his resources, his air, his food. She was the burden Valen had named her. She could not lift heavy objects or frighten away monsters. But as she looked at the schematics of the air filtration system still on his main screen, her own expertise, long dismissed by her people as a passive, scholarly pursuit, stirred. She recognized the biofilm. It was a cousin to the gray spore fungus listed in the initial planetary survey. The Xylan database, which Kalen had open in another window, listed it as highly resilient, recommended mechanical abrasion. But Elara knew more. On her homeworld, a similar fungus was kept in check by a specific, acidic metabolite produced by a common vine-like creeper. She looked out the viewport, scanning the tree line. There. The tri-leafed, sorrow vine. It was considered a pest. Useless. Hesitantly she called his name. Kalen. He looked up from his workbench. Using a stylus on a slate, she began to draw. Not the elegant, artistic renderings of her people, but rough, functional diagrams. A molecule. The fungus. The vine. She pointed from the vine on the screen to the one outside the window, then mimed applying it to the filter. Kalen was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her crude drawings. Then he stood, grabbed a collection kit and walked outside. He returned with clippings of the sorrow vine. He spent the next hour in his small lab area, crushing, distilling, and testing. He ran a sample of the biofilm through the analyzer, then applied a drop of his new concoction. The biofilm visibly withered and dissolved. He looked from the successful experiment to Elara. He didn't smile, but his eyes held a new, distinct quality, respect. He gave a single, firm nod. It works. That simple acknowledgement was a warmth that flooded her entire being. It was the first time her knowledge had been treated as strength, not a curiosity. Later, he led her to a large, sealed terrarium tucked into a corner of the habitat. Inside was a miniature ecosystem of startling green. He pointed to a patch of humble, vibrant moss clinging to a rock. Pioneer species, he said, carefully enunciating the new Xylan words he must have learned from the database. He looked at her, his gaze intense. From Earth. They find a place, a crack in stone, barren soil, and they make it life. They make a home. He tapped the glass. We are like this. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Elara. Her tribe's philosophy was one of fragility. They sought a perfect, pre-made environment and discarded anything that threatened that perfection. Humanity's was one of profound, stubborn resilience. They did not seek the perfect world. They built it themselves with grit and knowledge and an unbreakable will. Strength was not about being the fastest or most perfect. It was about the capacity to endure, to adapt, and to help others do the same. Compassion was not a drain on resources. It was the most fundamental tool for survival. In this quiet, powerful revelation, the last of her fear melted away, replaced by a dawning, terrifying, and exhilarating understanding. A new and unfamiliar peace settled within the habitat's sturdy walls. Elara's leg, supported by the polymer cast, grew stronger each day. She no longer saw herself as a patient or a guest, but as a partner. Her xenobotanical knowledge, once a sterile academic pursuit, became an active, vital component of their shared existence. She identified a root that could be purified into a potent antiseptic, and a leaf whose fibers, when woven, created a material stronger than synthetic cloth. Kalen would listen, his quiet attention a form of profound respect, and then he would act, using his engineering skill to turn her discoveries into practical applications. They were a perfect, symbiotic unit, her mind in his hands, her understanding of Silas's biology and his command over technology. The silence between them was no longer empty, it was filled with a comfortable, productive understanding. The Vermilion Wildlands, once a death sentence, became a challenging but manageable workplace seen through the armored glass. The peace was shattered by a shrieking proximity alarm, far more urgent than the one for the air filters. It was the perimeter defense. Kalen was at the main console in an instant, his body tensed. The exterior camera feed flickered to life on the main screen. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The image showed a group of figures stumbling through the crimson ferns, their movements desperate and uncoordinated. Their silver skin was caked with grime, their elegant robes torn to shreds. It was her tribe. At their head was Elder Valen, his face a mask of pure terror, his usual composure utterly gone. Behind them, emerging from the tree line with a fluid, predatory grace, was a pack of screechers, not just one but 4 of them, their iridescent carapaces glinting in the sun, their claws digging into the soft soil as they advanced. The Xylans were cornered, their backs almost against the habitat's outer wall. They had nowhere to run. Valen's head swiveled, his large, dark eyes scanning for salvation, for any crevice or hope. His gaze locked onto the main viewport, and he saw her. Elara standing beside the massive human, clean, sheltered, and whole. The shock on his face was absolute, a physical blow that crumpled his features. It was followed by a wave of shame so profound he seemed to shrink. And then a desperate, clawing hope. He lunged for the external comms panel, slamming his hand against the activator. His voice, usually so melodic and controlled, was a cracked and broken thing shredded by fear. Elara. By the cycles that bound us. Please. The plea was a physical force striking her in the chest. She stood frozen, her hand gripping the edge of the console for support. She saw the other faces of her tribe, the weavers, the technicians, the children she had once taught, their eyes wide with a primal terror she knew all too well. The children, Valen sobbed, the words tearing from him. The little ones, we will all perish out here. We were wrong. We were wrong. The confession echoed in the silent habitat. We were wrong. The 3 most impossible words a Xylan elder could ever utter. They were an admission that shattered the very foundation of their society, of the Great Cycle itself. It was a plea for mercy from the one they had shown none. Elara's mind became a storm. The memory of the cold, departing ship. The weight of the single nutrient bar. The crushing certainty of her own worthlessness. The ache of betrayal was a fresh wound. Let them face the cycle they worshipped so dearly. Let them become nourishment for the soil. It was the perfect, logical, Xylan conclusion. But she was no longer just Xylan. She looked at the children huddled behind their parents. She saw herself in their terrified eyes. And then she looked at Kalen. He had not moved. He had not reached for a weapon or the door release. His entire being was focused on her. His hand rested on the mechanism that would open the heavy door, but he made no move to activate it. His gray eyes held hers, intense and questioning. He was placing the power, the judgment, the entire moral weight of this decision, squarely in her hands. The Death Worlder, the supposed savage, was waiting for a signal from the one they had cast out. The universe had inverted completely. The screechers let out a synchronized shriek, edging closer, sensing the imminent kill. Valen pressed his forehead against the cold exterior wall, his body shaking with silent sobs. The choice was hers. Vengeance or compassion. The old way or the way of the moss that grew in the cracks. The storm in Elara's eyes cleared, replaced by a terrifying, absolute calm. The ghosts of betrayal and pain were silenced by the immediate, desperate reality before her. Valen's philosophy had been a cage. Kalen had shown her the open sky. To choose vengeance now would be to step back into that cage and lock it herself. She met Kalen's unwavering gaze and gave a single sharp nod. They are flawed, she said, her voice steady, resonating with a newfound authority. But so is the moss. It survives. It helps other things survive. Let them in. Kalen's hand moved. The door release mechanism engaged with a heavy, hydraulic hiss. The reinforced door began to slide open, revealing a sliver of the chaotic, shrieking world outside. For a frozen second, the Xylans stared, unable to process their salvation. Then survival instinct overrode their shock. They scrambled over the threshold in a terrified, stumbling wave, collapsing onto the hard floor, gasping in the clean, filtered air. They were a pitiful sight, a tapestry of ripped silks and bleeding scratches, their perfect grace reduced to desperate, shuddering heaps. Kalen did not wait. As the last Xylan tumbled inside, he stepped through the closing door into the fray. He carried no blaster, no plasma blade. He was simply a wall of plasteel and resolve. The lead screecher, confused by the sudden appearance of this larger creature, hesitated. Kalen activated the sonic device on his belt. The low, pulsing thrum filled the air, a physical pressure that made the Xylans inside whimper and cover their sensitive ears. To the screechers, it was an unbearable assault on their finely tuned senses. They recoiled, their shrieks turning from predatory to pained. Kalen took another step forward, his presence an expanding zone of dominance. He was not attacking, he was asserting. He was defining the boundary of his territory, and his definition was absolute. The predators, faced with an opponent they could not intimidate and a sensation they could not endure, turned and fled back into the vermilion shadows. Kalen stood for a long moment, ensuring their retreat, before turning and re-entering the habitat. The door sealed behind him, shutting out the wild. The silence inside was thick with shock and shame. The Xylans huddled together, their eyes darting from the giant, silent human to Elara, who stood beside his workstation, her posture straight, her gaze clear. Valen slowly pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the sturdy, welded walls, the functioning systems, the terrarium of vibrant green moss. He saw the partnership in the space, her botanical samples next to his engineering schematics. Finally, his eyes settled on Elara, on the confident strength in her stance, so different from the broken creature he had left to die. The truth was a devastating avalanche. "We sought perfection," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "We believed it was purity. We discarded the flawed to maintain it." His voice broke as he gestured weakly at the habitat, at Kalen. "And in our pursuit of flawlessness, we found only fragility. We would have shattered out there." He looked directly at Elara, his pride completely gone, replaced by a raw, painful awe. You embraced the broken, the imperfect, and you found this." The word encompassed everything: the shelter, the safety, the unbreakable alliance. The great cycle was a lie we told ourselves to justify our cruelty. The purpose is not to be perfect. It is to be whole. Days passed. The tribe, humbled and silent, kept to a corner of the main chamber, their efficiency now directed at staying out of the way. They watched, mesmerized, as the human and the outcast worked. They saw Kalen's quiet strength and Elara's intelligent guidance. They saw a new way to exist. Eventually, with Kalen's help, they managed to repair their damaged shuttle's primary systems. The time for departure had come. Valen approached Elara as she stood near the terrarium. "The Enclave awaits," he said softly. "We will go. We will try to build something different. Something sturdier." He paused, his gaze sincere. "Come with us. You can lead us." Elara looked from Valen's hopeful face to Kalen, who was watching from his workbench, his expression neutral, giving her this choice as he had given her the first. She saw the moss on the rock, a pioneer species that found a home in the most unlikely of places. She had found hers. "My place is here," she said, her voice filled with a finality that held no bitterness. "The work here is not finished." Valen bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect he had never given her before. "Then we will learn from your example. Thank you, Elara, for showing us that strength is not about what you cast out, but what you shelter." The Xylan ship lifted off, a solitary vessel carrying a broken philosophy toward an uncertain redemption. Elara stood at the viewport watching it go. She felt no longing, no regret. A presence settled beside her. Kalen. He did not speak. He simply stood, a solid, silent monument to resilience, to the power of a sheltering heart. Together they looked out at the wild, beautiful, imperfect world they would continue to shape, not as a perfect Xylan enclave but as a whole, human home. She was not left behind anymore. She had arrived.